and welcome to the Baines Lens. It is so great to be here today. I'm Jessica Molloy, and today we're going to talk about behavior. It's a concept that is so abstract. It means different things to different people, but I'm going to tell you how we view behavior through the lens of Baines. So I'm first going to tell you a little story about yesterday. You'll hear a lot of times I'll talk about my kids or my family on this podcast, and it's a great story to introduce behavior. So I have three beautiful children, and I was able to go for a hike with my children in a preserve near our house yesterday. And we live in Maine. We live on a little island off the coast of Maine. And right now in Maine, it happens to be a tad bit chilly. It's no heat wave, to be honest. It's around 24 degrees. And I say to my kids, let's go out to the preserve. Let's get some fresh air. The sun is out. It's beautiful. I have one of my youngest, Kira. She says, "Sure, Mom, let's go do that. I need to look for a couple of rocks and we can go look at birds." Fantastic. My middle daughter, we say, "Okay, we're going to go to the preserve." Well, I wasn't specific enough about the preserve that I was actually talking about. So once she figured out, she had a really different reaction than I had expected. Her behavior was unexpected for me, considering how often she likes to go on these walks with me. And when I mentioned to her that her behavior, as we say, her reaction to my suggestion, when she realized what preserve we were going to, was kind of unexpected. And it took her a minute because in her mind, she was thinking one thing and needed to transition to thinking something different. And that's a lot about behavior, right? We all have our own idea about what is going to take place, how we need to behave, and what type of reaction we have based on our environment. So when we think about Baines, we think about the environment that we're sitting in, or our child is in, or ourselves are in, and what causes us to have the reactions that we do. Right? I always laugh when we go into a library, and when my kids were little, we were like, okay, you need to use your library voice, right? That is a behavior that our society expects us. When we go into a library, we need to be quiet, right? Well, behavior isn't as easy as it sounds for especially our children that have a neurodevelopmental disorder. So my children have autism, two of mine. And so we're always looking at, what does behavior mean? Because behavior is communication. We respond a certain way, our bodies respond a certain way based on the environment we're in, whether we're tired, whether we're hungry, whether we need to move our bodies, or if we're overstimulated. And that goes for anyone. I often remind myself that after I get home from a busy day, my reaction to something when I first walk through the door is going to be vastly different than if I have a few minutes to pause, put my things down, pet my dogs, and then have a conversation I might need to have with somebody in my household. Right? Or you're cooking dinner and you're trying to help your kids with homework and your child might be crying. You're doing a zillion things as well. And homework typically is that time of night where we call it the witching hour, which is so hard. Your kids are tired, you're trying to end the evening. And so when we're looking at behavior, the Baines lens takes into account all the different factors. What's going on in the environment? Is your child hungry or tired? Because you're going to have a very different reaction if one of those needs aren't being met. And also, are they able to express themselves, right? Verbally, are they able to tell you what's going on? So I always go back to behavior is communication. What is that behavior telling us? Because something isn't being met. I truly believe that no child or human wants to be bad or naughty in the ways that we think. And so we tend to look at behavior as either a bad or good thing. Oh, wow, you picked up your toys. What a great girl, right? Or you just did a great job at picking up your room. What a great boy you are. Or, oh, wow, you took that toy from somebody. That wasn't a very good choice. You're bad for doing something like that. We label behavior as good or bad versus looking at, okay, why did we have that reaction? What is that trying to say to us? So, when I typically look at my own household and my own children or my students, I really try to put in perspective, oh, wow, you're having this reaction. What's underneath all of this for you to have that reaction? Sometimes I know for myself, I hold a lot of feelings inside sometimes. And then I have my behavior might be I'm quiet, right? Or I tend to need more alone time so I can process. But somebody might take that as me being rude or not sociable, right? When we see a child in class that is shy, right? We typically, they go unnoticed a lot of time because one, their behavior doesn't need to be managed in class. And we look at managing behavior versus understanding behavior. In the Baines lens, we try to see where in our environment do we function the best? What type of transitions are hard? What type of transitions might be easy for us? Also, where are our safe space, right? So a lot of times kids will hold in all of their feelings all day and then they get home and they're a really hot mess. That's because home is a safety place. They can let out all of those emotions that they've held in all day. Yes, that's very hard for mom and dads usually, or any adult or parent that's in the house because you're like, oh my word, what's happening here? They hold it in all day and the teacher or staff at school don't see that, right? But you see something different. So when we think about behavior, I leave this with you is thinking about how do we support behavior and what does behavior mean to you? So, behavior to me means communication. What is your body telling us, right? 80% of communication is through body language, and your body is telling more information than your words. And especially when you're dealing with younger children, you're going to get more information from their body and their body language than their vocabulary because they're still trying to identify emotions, understand what they're feeling, and really be able to say to the people that care for them, what do I need? And think about that. Even as adults, that's still really hard for us to do, to tell other people, what do we need so we don't feel and act a certain way? I'm going to throw in another level here when we look at behavior, especially for our children with NDD diagnoses, is anxiety plays a huge role in our behavior. Are we able to be social? Are we able to advocate for ourselves? Are we able to find the resources that we need and tools that we need so we don't have the feelings of anxiety? And so when you see a child with anxiety, you might see disruption, right? Because they don't know how to express that. So it can turn into anger. You might see that become depressed or sad or isolate. Or even the other piece with anxiety is that fear of being away from their parents, their siblings, their caregivers, because they don't know how to find those supports in another environment. So, what I want you guys to think about with behavior is how do you behave? What does your behavior tell you about yourself? What does your behavior tell you about how you're supporting the things that you need? Because as adults, we mirror and train our children to have behaviors. They're watching us. So if we're understanding how the environment or what we need in our environment to feel our best selves, we're showing that same skills to our kids. What do they need, and helping them figure out what do they need in order to feel their best selves. I want to spend a few minutes talking about behavior as it relates to ADHD. I see a lot of young adults as well as young children in my practice that have ADHD. ADHD is not necessarily always behavior signal. So we look at diagnostically, can a child sit still? Can they focus? Do they have emotional regulation? That's really hard for any child at a young age to have all of those things. One, to begin with, kids sit way too long. But when we look at ADHD, yes, they have impulse control. That's part of ADHD. Yes, they are distracted. Yes, they can have big emotions. And all of that comes out in behavior. And so sometimes behavior is not always easy to manage and to control, but we have to work at finding how do we lower your nervous system in order to, so it's functioning at its primal state, and in that it's not in a fight or flight response. So when we see overactive behavior, that means that your parasympathetic nervous system is in that fight or flight or freeze response. And a lot of times for kids that have an NDD diagnosis, we see a lot of that. And behavior is the first thing that we see, and it's usually what gets people into finding support or services for their family because the behavior is too much or not able to be managed or is at a level of concern. My favorite story that I tell a lot is about going into a grocery store with, at that time, I just had two of my kids. My youngest hadn't been born yet, and my oldest was 2.5. And I had my middle daughter in my little stroller that I had going into Hannaford. And I was like, okay, we're just going to go in and get a few things. Well, my oldest was not happy about going into the grocery store. And I will say my oldest was the easiest kid I had ever seen. And I had been a teacher and a sister. And I mean, if I was guaranteed I could have Kaylee again, she was just so easy. There was no tantrums barely at ever. But at this one time at the grocery store, she decided to go down the produce aisle and huck limes at me because she was so mad that we had to go to the grocery store. Now, I know that there's a lot of parents that have had similar situations in the grocery store and everyone is staring at you, right? That behavior coming from my daughter was very clear that I might have had intentions of going to the grocery store, but it wasn't going to happen. And so obviously, my daughter and I left the grocery store until it was a more appropriate time and everybody was in a better state than our current state. So, as parents, think about behavior as what is your expectation? And then what is the skills that your child has, and can they meet that level of expectation? Do they need scaffolding? Do they need supports in order to reach your expectation? And maybe your expectation is a little bit too advanced. I am always looking at what is my expectation, and then can my kids reach that expectation, and is it realistic, and is it my own stuff that is making me have these expectations of behavior? You know, society always has its own idea of how should we act. What does it mean to be a good person? How should you behave in different places in public versus in your home. So when we think about behavior, I want to leave this with you is really write out, what are your expectations? Have you ever sat and thought about what are your values and your morals on the thought of behavior? Because is it your feelings of what other people might think, or is it truly what you think? And that will help you kind of keep in mind of, if your child's behaving a certain way in public and you're okay with that, then that's okay. And sometimes you're going to choose to pick battles with your kids that other parents might find a need to pick a battle or not. I see this a lot in doctors' offices, right? There's sometimes I'm not going to choose to pick a battle with my daughter because it's just going to end badly. And being able to compromise, I think that's a lot too. We use power to change behavior versus looking at behavior more as a communication. And that behavior means that that child is not getting their needs met or feeling like they're heard. And so, how do we come to an understanding to decrease that behavior? I could talk a lot on behavior, but I hope that this has been informative. And one of my favorite people of all times talks a lot about behavior, which is Ross Green. And so if you have not ever heard of him or have read his stuff or seen his stuff, I highly recommend. He has a program called Life's in the Balance, and he talks a lot about behavior and what we think about on the level of good versus bad behavior and how we push that onto our children as well. So I hope this has been informative, and I look forward to next week talking about aspirations and how to have goal setting with your kids and also within your family. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to be in touch next week. Thank you, everyone.